The movie opens with the family having a lot of fun, playing games together, and enjoying Christmas. It then cuts to Natalie in the present. She's seated in her parked car and calling her mom, who hints that Natalie might be lonely due to the holidays. She gets out of the car and walks a bit, still talking. Back home, tender moments between Tom and Natalie's cousin Annie unfold as Annie cooks dinner, and Tom teasingly keeps her company. Natalie tries to explain to Mom why she had to go there, that she would only stay a few minutes, and never again. When Natalie arrives at Tom and Annie's, Tom greets her at the door, while Annie tries to wrap things up in the kitchen. Immediately jumping into the reason for her attendance, Natalie wants to make sure her mom does not look at fault for the party. She asks where everyone else is because no one else has arrived yet. Tom reassures her not to worry. Annie enters the living room, happy to see Natalie. They greet each other with a warm, tight hug and compliment each other. Natalie offers to help cook, but Annie insists that guests don't have to cook. Then Natalie proceeds to talk about her recently finished experience at school, which she has termed bittersweet. Annie cautiously does not ask any questions that might sound insensitive and is glad for her. In her rush to finish preparing the meal, Annie spills something on her green dress. Immediately, a knock is heard at the door. As Tom tries to help clean up Annie's dress, he asks Natalie to answer the door. Natalie opens the door to find Doe holding a bottle of wine. She attempts to be friendly, but Doug, who had been speaking Italian before the door opened, walks straight in without saying so much as a word and immediately starts eating cheese balls. Natalie attempts to be warm towards Doug. She had introduced herself earlier and reminded Doug that he hadn't done the same. Doug mentions his name with nonchalance while munching on the cheese balls. Natalie proceeds to introduce herself, and Doug reminds her that she happened to have done that before. She promptly cools down now, minding her own business. As Tom enters the sitting room to take photos of the very neat dining, Doug acts weirdly with regard to the food. Not long after, the house fills with guests, all of them making merry, some eating, others drinking, and Doug with his weird theatrics. Annie reminds Tom that taking pictures is an integral part of the party, and Tom agrees. While Natalie is standing in the middle of the sitting room alone, Annie comes over to her. She tells Natalie about Doug, but Natalie can't help it, and has to mention that Doug is acting really weird. Annie teases she saw the both of them hitting on each other, but before Natalie refutes that notion, Annie says she was just kidding. She's concerned and really wants Natalie to mingle. Tom is doing some refilling when Logan shows up. The two men are very excited at the thought of seeing each other. This is because Tom is more excited. He wasn't expecting Logan to make it to the party. Then Logan, who stays outside town, says he would be moving over to town as he'd be working at his company's new office in town. Tom calls Annie in to meet Logan, and they are both set on fire with each other. Annie offers quickly to introduce him to Natalie, but Natalie is nowhere to be found. Natalie starts feeling uneasy when Cliff randomly asks if her school has lions. Things get even stranger when he goes on about how every good school should have lions, because apparently, that shows how strong their academics are. Natalie just stands there, completely at a loss for words, her mouth hanging open like she's seen something unbelievable. Later, she escapes to the living room, trying to clear her mind while sipping her drink. She casually browses through some of Tom's books when Logan walks over and introduces himself. He notices right away that she doesn't seem to know many people. Logan doesn't waste time. He starts asking her questions before he even tells her his name. Natalie mentions she's in graduate school, and they exchange a few jokes. She could probably use her psychology degree to figure him out, and their conversation starts to flow naturally, with a playful back and forth. The chemistry between them builds quickly, and the sexual tension soon escalates. They're soon pressed against the wall, kissing and making out passionately. They end up in the restroom, ready to take things further, when there's suddenly a knock on the door. Logan doesn't even pause for a second. Tom and Annie realize they've messed up big time as the oven is nearly on fire. Thick smoke fills the house while they scramble for a solution. The guests start leaving, some even grabbing food as they sneak out. Natalie and Logan's moment ends fast when Logan smells the smoke. Seeing the house filling up with it, they decide to jump out through the window. Outside, they meet the guests staring at them, and they feel a bit embarrassed. A few people even start clapping. Doug isn't impressed though. He had been knocking earlier and had to use Cliff's bathroom instead. The firefighters give Tom and Annie advice on avoiding future disasters, while Natalie and Logan almost pick up where they left off. She asks him about his New Year's plans, and when Logan says he has none, it sparks an idea for her. Logan jokes that maybe Tom and Annie set them up and hints that Natalie hasn't been in many long-term relationships. The conversation turns sour, with both of them making sarcastic comments. Natalie decides she's had enough and walks out. Despite the chaos, the party continues outside in Tom's yard. Everyone is drinking and dancing to the music, determined to keep the night going. It's another year and time for the annual Clarkmas party. Annie, wearing the same green dress from last year, is busy cooking while chatting with Natalie. Natalie shares a family concern. Someone in the family needs to have a baby, and since Annie is married, the responsibility falls on her. But Annie is firm. She and Tom aren't ready for kids yet. When Natalie mentions she probably won't find a man, Annie tells her it's because she tends to dismiss people too quickly, without giving them a real chance. Annie even starts naming some of the guys Natalie has turned down. Natalie argues that those men had weird habits she wasn't able to deal with. Annie responds by reminding her that everyone has bad habits, including Tom. The doorbell rings and Natalie heads over to answer it. It's Logan again, but this time he acts like he's never met her before, even introducing himself all over. On top of that, he didn't bring the ice he promised, so Natalie offered to go pick some up herself. Annie reminds them that Natalie wouldn't be able to carry the ice all by herself, so Tom suggests that Logan goes with her. Natalie smirks at the suggestion but doesn't argue. The drive to the ice store turns out to be a silent one, until the usual banter between them resumes. Natalie doesn't hold back as she fumes that Logan wouldn't even say anything about their last meeting. She recalls many instances where she'd also see Logan on the streets, and Logan would avoid her. Logan laughs and insinuates that Natalie is making efforts to see him. Their egos won't let them be on the same page. They search for a parking spot, and Natalie promises to be the bigger one and act like nothing ever happened between them. Things get better for them after Logan offers to put the 2 ice bags on his lap as they drive home. Natalie is happy that the ice won't get to touch any of her important documents in the car. The ride back to Tom's place is cordial, and they squash whatever beef they had. Natalie and Logan return, and as she helps Tom fill the tub with ice for the drinks, Tom breaks some news to her. Annie has been laid off from her job. He begs Natalie not to bring it up and to keep calm. He's worried that Annie bottling it up is a bad idea. Natalie tries to lighten the mood by joking about Annie's habit of sticking to routines, mentioning the word fire in the process. Tom quickly begs her not to say that word, worried it might bring back memories of last year's Clarkmas incident. Meanwhile, Cliff, now looking chubbier with a beard, is going on and on to Megan about how he put out the fire last year. Annie notices and wonders why he keeps retelling the story. Despite Megan's disinterest, Cliff insists she wants to hear it. Logan and Tom are chatting about Naomi, Logan's ex from school. Logan thinks it's for the best that they've both moved on from whatever they had. Natalie walks over and tells Tom he needs to fix something in the kitchen, so Tom heads off. Natalie lingers nearby like she's waiting for something. Logan finally gives in, compliments her dress, then apologizes for pretending not to know her earlier. He thought it would make things easier, but Natalie disagrees. She accepts his apology, then they share a few moments of lighthearted banter. Nina enters the party with a tray of her special cookies. She wants Annie to try them out. Although Annie has some reservations at first, Nina convinces her and Annie tastes them. The party goes on with them clustered in groups, some chatting while others play games. Nina complains to Annie that she's getting old without a man in her life. She states her mom already had 2 kids when she was 27, the same age Nina has gotten to. Nina appreciates Annie for throwing the party every holiday. She wonders where she'd be every holiday if not for these parties. Shannon walks in. Nina and Annie can't seem to recall who Shannon is, so they just conclude she's Tom's friend. Shannon walks right over to Logan, who's in the middle of talking with Natalie, and gives him a hug. She makes a joke about having a thing with him, but it quickly becomes clear it's not a joke when she kisses Logan in front of Natalie. Feeling awkward and hurt, Natalie excuses herself and heads to the restroom. Doug, needing to use the restroom, hears Natalie inside and is reminded of last year's situation. When she finally comes out, she's clearly upset, realizing Logan is involved with someone else. Doug, still in his goofy mood, brings up the time Logan and Natalie spent together in the bathroom last year, but he quickly quiets down when a nearby guest interrupts. Natalie and Logan soon find themselves in a little argument. What starts off as hushed words quickly escalates into a full-on confrontation. Annie walks in, and they immediately stop. Shannon takes the chance to thank Annie for hosting the party. After Annie figures out who Shannon is, Natalie and Logan resume their back and forth. Logan tells Natalie she holds on to things, making Natalie fire back that Logan just lets things go way too easily. Annie, who's just trying to grab a beer from the ice tub, is visibly annoyed. She doesn't care much about their drama and just wants to enjoy the party. Doug is the last to leave the party. Before he goes, he makes sure to thank Tom for always hosting. Tom and Annie are left alone to start talking about random things. Out of nowhere, Annie asks him if he's happy with her. He's confused by the question, but promises he's happy. It's 1 year since the last Clarkmas party, and Tom's house is almost set for another one. The decor is hanging pretty while Annie wears the same green dress again. 3 times in a row, Annie. Annie feels that Tom might be doing too much with the decorations. She feels Tom is trying to impress his work friends. Annie is right. There's an opening in Tom's company, and he's only trying to prove that he's quite responsible. Annie is happy to hear that he's been considered for a promotion. She jokes that she would be willing to do anything to bribe whoever needs to be bribed, serving them properly during the party. The party kicks off, and the faces are familiar ones with a few of Tom's co-workers. Cliff tells his usual confusing stories when Nina walks in with a tray of cookies. Cliff grabs one and takes a bite before she can object. He doesn't seem impressed and Nina isn't happy. She heads over to Tom, who's talking with some work friends. It feels off when his friends start grabbing the cookies. Nina had wanted Annie to see them first before anyone else touched them. Logan walks over to Natalie and says hi. They start talking. Logan mentions he's proud of himself for remembering her name. Natalie, trying to be polite, counters, "It's basic to remember the name of someone you've met more than once." Logan then says they're a match on a dating site. Natalie tries to explain that she didn't swipe right on him, but Logan insists she must have, or they wouldn't be matched. Logan also comments that she could have picked a better picture for her profile. Their conversation shifts into some light banter, but Natalie's not impressed and tells him she doesn't like his photos either. Annie and Tom join them. Annie wants Natalie to share her excitement about being 1 semester away from graduating. Logan congratulates her. The conversation moves to soulmates, with Tom and Annie talking about it. Logan and Natalie both agree they don't believe in the idea. Finally, they find common ground. Cliff shows up again, still talking, and Logan asks Natalie if she wants to go outside for some air. Before they can leave, Cliff pulls out a game where everyone holds a part of a device. The last person to press a button after the buzzer gets shocked. Tom's expression suggests that he'd rather not bring out the device, since he's trying to impress his co-workers. Tom's female co-worker states that the device looks masochistic, but joyfully agrees to join in playing. Natalie and Logan are sitting outside when Logan voices he's logged off all dating sites and is ready for something serious. Natalie admits she misjudged him in the past. She waits for Logan to say the same about her, but instead, Logan, with a playful ego, says he hasn't misjudged her. He thinks the only reason Natalie said that is so he would say it back. Inside the house, Tom is purposely losing the game to prevent his co-workers from getting shocked. One of his female co-workers is really into the game and says it's the best thing ever. She even mentions she wants to get shocked. Natalie tells Logan her program is ending soon and she doesn't know what to do next. Logan shares that he often feels the same way, and that his tech career started on a whim after his military tour ended. Back at the game, Tom steps aside and lets Cliff take his place. This time, the female coworker gets shocked, and it hits her hard. The look on the coworkers' faces shows they're not happy with Tom, and it makes him feel bad. Natalie asks Logan about his plans for the new year, but he's still figuring things out. She complains that New Year's is too demanding and puts too much pressure on people. Logan talks a bit about his childhood, and soon the two are edging closer to a kiss. Just before their lips meet, a policeman shows up, asking them a question before heading inside the house. As soon as the police enter, Cliff points to Tom as the owner of the apartment, even though no one asks. The officer says someone complained about noise and tells them to keep it down and wrap up the party. Tom agrees and the policeman leaves. Tom's co-workers are also calling it a night. As Tom tries to explain that he's responsible, they brush it off and leave. Annie notices that Tom feels bad about the game and reassures him, patting him on the back. Natalie and Logan come back inside, but most people are already leaving. Logan asks Natalie for her number, and she insists on writing it on paper instead of putting it in his phone. For her, it's a test to see if he'll actually call or lose the paper. They share a kiss before heading out. With everyone gone, Annie and Tom clean up and reflect on their lives. Tom wonders if they should keep having these parties. He asks Annie if she feels stuck with him. Annie doesn't feel that way, but Tom is cautious. He doesn't want them to feel stuck or stagnant. Annie reassures him that she's happy with the progress they're making and says the parties should continue since she and the guests always look forward to them. 1 year later, it's another Clarkmess party. This time Tom and Annie have moved into a nicer apartment, a little farther from town. Annie, wearing her usual green dress, complains that people aren't showing up on time like they used to. Tom thinks the delay might be because of the distance. Soon, the doorbell rings. It's Doug and his girlfriend, Katrina. Tom and Annie don't quite understand Doug and Katrina's dynamic, but play along as good hosts. The doorbell rings again, and it's Natalie, accompanied by Adler, her fiancé. Adler compliments Annie's home, calling it beautiful. Tom meets Adler and welcomes him to the family. He later joins Chris and Megan as they chat about the challenges of raising a child. Logan walks in with a crate of beer and heads over to Tom, who's chatting with Adler. The three men exchange pleasantries, and Tom casually mentions that Adler is Natalie's fiancé. Logan, out of shock, almost finishes a bottle of beer in a single gulp. Tom notices Logan's reaction and pulls him aside, but Logan insists he's fine, even though his actions suggest otherwise. He heads straight to Natalie and Adler, making a poor impression. Sensing some tension, Adler politely excuses himself, then Natalie and Logan alone. Logan and Natalie step outside, and Natalie is clearly upset. She tells Logan how disappointed she is. She says she loved him, but she couldn't handle his constant disappearing. She's frustrated that Logan is now trying to mess with her current relationship. Logan hints that he might have had a valid reason for disappearing but didn't share it. Natalie gets tired of the back and forth and heads back inside to Adler. Logan sits with Nina and tells her that he lost his mom a few months ago. He explains how the holidays have felt different without her around. The Clarkmas party wraps up after everyone gathers for a group photo. Another year goes by and it's the holiday season again. This time, Annie, who is heavily pregnant, and Tom decide not to have a party. Soon the doorbell rings, and it's Natalie. She doesn't need a party to visit her beloved friend Annie. Natalie tells them she has called off her wedding with Adler. They're good friends, but aren't really in love. She starts crying as she talks about how she's going to break the news to her mom and everyone who is excited about the wedding. Annie and Tom comfort her. They decide to do a little dance for Annie, who starts talking about how much her life has changed. Natalie tells her she should appreciate the progress she's made so far. Natalie begins to rant about her own life when Annie suddenly has a contraction. Tom comes back, and Annie says she's going to take a bath to cool down. Tom wants to talk to Natalie about the whole Adler situation, but she brushes it off, saying it's not important. When Tom asks how Natalie feels about Annie, she states Annie just struggles with things she can't control. They talk about Logan, and Tom mentions that Logan is seeing someone now. Doug and Katrina are even getting married. Natalie starts to feel bad for herself. The day ends with just the three of them taking some pictures. Another year passes, and it's time for another Clarkmas party. The house quickly fills up with guests, both adults and kids running around. Natalie arrives, and Annie is thrilled to see her. She takes Natalie to the backyard, where Tom has set things up since there are more people this time. Natalie joins a group of women in conversation. When she mentions she's a psychologist, one of the women assumes Natalie must have her life all together. Another woman disagrees, saying therapists are usually the worst at relationships. Cliff shows up and, as always, starts telling his wild stories. He remarks he loves kids, but then claims having kids isn't a big deal, backing it up by saying even rats have babies, so it's nothing special. The doorbell rings, and Natalie goes to answer it. It's Logan. They're polite to each other this time, and Natalie invites him in. After the usual pleasantries, Logan steps outside for some air, and soon Natalie joins him. They talk about what's been going on in their lives. Logan apologizes for things not working out between her and Adler, but Natalie affirms she's fine now. She admits breaking up with Adler was the right decision, because she was never really in love with him. Logan apologizes for messing things up. He tells Natalie he really likes her, but is terrified by that. He had a lot of personal issues, and losing his mom only made things worse, so he shut everyone out. He says he still likes her a lot, and to prove it, he pulls out the paper with Natalie's phone number, the one she gave him years ago. Natalie is speechless at first. After a moment, she remarks she isn't sure she wants to go down that road again. It's a sad moment for Logan, as they head back inside for the traditional Clarkmas photo shoot. Later, Tom and Logan talk about it, and Tom concludes that Logan missed every chance to be with Natalie. Tom invites him to join their New Year's Eve plans, but Logan already has an invite from some friends. He thinks they're setting him up to meet someone. On New Year's Eve, Logan is dressed and ready to go out when there's a knock at the door. To his surprise, it's Natalie. She steps inside, comments on his apartment, and asks him to sit down. She now knows what to say. Natalie begins her speech by relaying she's thought about it and really wants to be with him. Logan, having always had feelings for Natalie, finds it easy to respond. They share a kiss, and he tells her he loves her. After all these years, they finally get what they've been hoping for.